Hello and welcome to What's Bubbling at ZIM Bubbling. I'm Inventor Dan Zen, and we've got some exciting things happening because we're about to launch ZIM VEE or ZIM 5. So the code is already launched. There will be a new site soon. Let's just go take a look at the old site at zimjs.com. Here we are, and here's the bubbling thing. If we scroll down a little bit, here's one of the things that's coming. Particles. Well, it's actually here. So we'll take a look at a bubbling on particles. But before we get into the bubbling on particles, let's just take a look at the docs. Cladunk. And you'll see that we're on ZIM 5. If you were to poke your way into the updates, you'll see a fairly massive update in ZIM 5. So, like I said, yeah, a fair bit to go through. Let's take you through the main concept first, and that is, oops, should have gone just back to the docs there. That is ZIK. Right here. So it's a new global function called ZIK, Z-I-K. Let's increase the size of that a bit. Woo! And it receives either an array, a function, or an object. And I suppose I could have lowercased that array. Document change, document change. So opening this up, it's a global function that receives what's called a ZIM VEE value. Now, in the past, we have Zim Duo technique, because that was introduced in ZIM 2, Zim Duo technique of providing either parameters normally or a single configuration object. And then we also introduced the ZIM fourth methods, where we put all of the previous functions, well, they're still functions, but all these functions we added as methods to all the ZIM objects like buttons and triangles and etc. So in this case, in ZIM VEE, we're introducing this thing called a ZIM VEE value, which is a way of providing options. So you, in many cases, and it's been exciting to introduce this thing called there's a particle emitter called Emitter, and there's a wiggle, and so we'll show you that, and also some adjustments to the Zim Interval and Zim Animate and Move that all accept these ZIM VEE values, which means instead of putting in an actual final value, you can pass in one of three ways to provide options for that value. And then those methods or functions or classes or whatever it is that you're passing this into, they will pick from the options that you put in. So let's show you some examples. First of all, you can pass in an array of values to pick from, for instance, red, green, or blue. And then when the function runs, it'll pick one of those. Secondly, you can pass in a function that returns a value, for instance, return date now. So at any time your animate runs, it will take the current date and use that somehow, etc. I can show you some examples of functions running. Well, I'll just think of one right now. There's what's called a sink in the upcoming emitter. It emits particles, and the sink sort of attracts those particles. Well, you can pass in a function saying return the mouse X and mouse Y, and that way the sink will always move to the mouse X and mouse Y, and you don't actually have to do anything more. It's kind of neat. A third case is a rand object. So a Zim rand object is another term that we're introducing here. And that just means you're passing in an object that has the same parameters that match the Zim rand function. So that is a min value, a max value, whether you want it to be integers, and if you want the negative range as well. So if you had a min and max of 10 and 20, then negative true, you would then be getting a random number between 10 and 20 and minus 10 and minus 20. integers true would set it so that they would be, integers. False would be non-integers. Well, not whole numbers. What are they called? Decimal numbers, I guess. They all take the defaults of ZIMrand except for the integer one. ZIMrand by default is true for the integer, and yet the ZIMrand object here, it's actually false for the integer. So that's I think that's how it works. Yeah, so just watch that, and probably a little message about that right over here. Oh, a max is required as well. So that would allow you to pass in and get a random range, a numerical range, whereas the array of values allows you to provide specific instances of that kind of thing. And then you can also do any combination of the above. So you could have, in an array of things to pick from, you could have a series of objects, or an object and a function and a final value. And ZIK is recursive, which means it will take whatever it picks and run it through ZIK again. And if that happens to be another array inside, then it would carry on through that. Or if it's a function, it will run the function. And if the function returns an array, then it will take that array and pick one from the array. So it's recursive all the way through. It sounds complicated, perhaps, but if we just take a look at the code itself, so I'll just view the code here, that's all it is. So it's just a quick filter that does these types of things. So it's powerful, and yet really, really compact and sort of cheap in a sense. So we've been using it in the emitter, and like I said, in a few different cases, but and that's all now documented throughout the documentation and so forth for ZIM VEE, and I expect that we'll be using it more. It may even be to the point where anything, widths and heights of buttons and stuff like that might be set to just kind of automatically. We're already bringing in all the parameters and parsing them for the ZIM Duo technique. It could be that just in that one place, we could just filter things through ZIK. Now, I don't know about that yet, and I'm not sure if there'd be any speed ramifications of that. I know that there's some tricky bits in that if we are wanting to pass, if we want to say choose this function or choose this function or choose this function, you can't actually do that because ZIK will try and go into the function and look for a return value. So you cannot provide optional functions, and you cannot provide optional objects if the object has a max property. But that's quite rare. Otherwise, you can certainly pass in objects as options. So, I'm sorry, I could pass in an object and an object literal and an object literal here. As long as they don't have a max, then it would pick one of those objects and accept that. All right, so that's a lot of talk. However, it's quite powerful when you see it in action. And you might think, oh, well, why can't we just roll a random number and choose from this? Well, the issue is that some things are delayed. For instance, in the particle emitter, we say, hey, what particle to emit each time? And then we also say, what animation do you want to put on that particle, or something like that. Well, at the point of authoring, you could put in, say, randomly, I want this to happen, but then that's going to be passed in, and every time it's going to be the same. Even though you make it random at the start, from then on, you've already made the choice, and you have no choice but to make the choice. So if you could pass in options, then you do have a choice. You can sort of pass the options into the emitter and then have the emitter choose as it's building. And that wasn't available before something like ZIK. And there's been a number of cases that are like that. For instance, an interval. If you have an interval, well, geez, that interval is going to go at the same interval all the time. You can choose a random number at the beginning and pass that into the interval, and then great, the interval now goes at a random number, but that interval is always going at the same number. So if instead you pass in a ZIM VEE value, then the interval can process that with ZIK, and each time the interval runs, it can choose a random option from what you've provided. So isn't that neat? So you could make an interval run now either every second or every 2 seconds, or every 5 seconds or every range of a second and stuff like that. Now we had actually programmed the interval to be able to do that by just passing in an array of 2 numbers and it would choose between them. But then that was limiting. That's only a range. And these provide more ways of the 3 ways are quite extensive, really. By passing in a function like that, you can probably do anything. And that may be where this sort of functional programming, I've heard about it. I haven't tried it. I don't even know what it is. But some of my friends are kind of doing that. Hey there, Rex, if you're out there. So it'll be interesting to see if this is similar. So there's any combination. Also, by the way, you can just pass in, if it turns out that you pass in a single value, such as a number, a string, or a ZIM rectangle, or something like that. ZIK doesn't mind. It just looks at that and says, oh, okay, these aren't one of the options. I'll just pass this right through. So you're welcome to pass a single value, and that will be fine. All right, so that's a lot of talking. It wasn't much looking. Here's some examples. Now, some of these examples are just simple. If we have a var loop count and we pass in, and that's equal to 1, 2, and 3, we could say loop count is equal to ZIK at loop count. And so now loop counts 1, 2, or 3. So yeah, that's just an example of what it can do. So if just simple like this, could use loop count equals. So if you wanted to just get a random number, you could say loop count is ZIM shuffle the loop count, and then choose the first one, because if it's shuffled, the first one changes. But then you'd have to check first if loop count is an array rather than a single value. Yeah, that's true. But anyway, that's not the real power of it. Do you get what I mean? Like, you can't shuffle loop count if loop count was a single value. So that means you have to sort of, and I had already been doing that. I've been saying, okay, did you give me an array or did you give me a single value? If you gave me a single value, then put it in an array, and then we can shuffle the array, and we normalize it. We treat it as equal, as either array or a single value. Have you noticed that? It's nice. It's nice if you have only one asset that you're going to bring in, we let you pass it in as a string. But if you have more than one asset, you can pass in an array. So here I am on the other side sort of saying, oh, did they give me a string? If they did, put it in an array, and from now on you've got an array. This time an array of one thing, or maybe an array of more things. So anyway, ZIK also handles that kind of thing. Like I said, though, the power really is in the delayed aspect of being able to pass in these objects that aren't chosen yet so that they can then be chosen later. So here we have a rotation object with a min and a max of 20. Don't give me integers, and negative is true. So that's an example of a ZIM rand object that has values between -20 and -10, or 10 and 20. And this can be passed into a ZIM emitter, for instance, which will make multiple copies and rotate them with ZIK. So each thing that gets made will take your rand object here, this rand object specifically, and select from it. Okay, which is cool. And so that, in this case, here's the emitter that is using that rotation to decide on the rotation. Finally, an age, let's see. So if you say if user's age is greater than 18, then, oh, this is an example of a mixed thing, then return this array right here. Else return E and F. So if they're greater than 18, they can do A, B, or either C or D. Else return E or F. So now you could ZIK the age, and if age is 14, then it will be either E or F. If age is 19, for instance, then it will be either A, B, or one of these. So what that means is it's going to be 1/3 of the time it will be A, 1/3 of the time it will be, the other third of the time it will choose from one of these, and say it's C. So it'll be C less than, it would be A or B, and it will be D less than, it will be A and B. So that's what we mean by recursive. In this case, the function, if it returns this thing, then ZIK runs again. It takes a look at this, and if ZIK chooses this, it takes a look at the value and says, oh, no, I'm not done yet. And then ZIK chooses that. Finally, once it gets to a final value, it says D is what we've chosen. Okay. So I think that's enough about ZIK. Just close that up. It's a global function here, so you don't need a zim.zik. It's throughout the others, so if you take a look at the Zim Interval here, we, under the parameters, there's some examples. Under the parameter, it says ZIM VEE for the time. So that you can pass in just a normal time, like default's 1,000 milliseconds, so 1 second. You can pass in 2,000 milliseconds, fine. Or pass in a ZIM VEE value, and ZIK will pick the time. So a ZIM VEE value is an array of choices, or a function, or an object literal. Okay. Where there's more ZIM VEE choices, for instance, in animate and the emitter, let's just go there now. Animate has 2 stops. One's the global constant there, and the next one is the animate function. When there are heavier uses of ZIK, that's an example with ZIM VEE, just scrolling down here. We actually put in a reminder of what's going on. So it says some parameters below support ZIM VEE values. Use ZIK to pick a random thing. The ZIM VEE value can be the following: an array, a function, a rand, or combination, or just something single through. Okay, so a summary there for you, and same with the emitter. Like I said, maybe that ZIK goes throughout, and the neat thing about it here at What's Bubbling at Zim, the neat thing about it is Zim VEE was going to, and may have, a sort of a tag, a catch line of 5 live. 5 live. And ZIK and randomness really brings life to things. That's part of what makes, artificial intelligences seem real, when you can give them random things based on odds. And that's really all that emotions are, if you think about it. Oh, I'm so cold. So that's neat. I think that this does breathe life into it, and it allows these random options to be passed along and chosen later when desired. And that's really cool. I'm inventor Dan Zim on ZIK. Have a great day.